From the nation's capital in Washington, D.C., the Congressional Report, with your host, Iowa Congressman Tom Latham.
This country is based on farms, on small businesses, and creating jobs and opportunities. That is the lifeblood of this nation.
And now your host, Congressman Tom Latham.
This month, Congress wipes the slate clean and begins a brand new session. Dozens of new faces will join the House and Senate for the 112th Congress, and lawmakers representing every congressional district and state will begin crafting new legislation. It's truly an exciting time on Capitol Hill. The transition will bring plenty of ceremony, but the new Congress will also face plenty of new challenges. Joining me today is Steve Livengood of the U.S. Capitol Historical Society to talk about this transition and the history of the Congress. Steve, welcome to the show. This is not your first time on the Congressional Report, I believe. But
thank you. It's nice to be back.
Yeah. Tell us about yourself and the Historical Society, and give us a little background.
Okay. I came to Washington myself to go to college at American University. Started volunteering for my congressman from Kansas, and ended up staying here and loving it a lot. Got involved in congressional history, particularly through giving tours of the Capitol to people. And the Capitol Historical Society was founded by Congressman Fred Schwengel from Iowa, so we have a special connection with Iowans about that.
In January, when this show is being broadcast, we'll have started the new Congress. Can you tell us a little walk about what happens with the new Congress? How does this all work?
Well, the first thing, of course, is that the parties need to get organized and celebrate their victories, and then begin to organize the Congress. This time we're going to have a new majority and probably a new speaker. And then once the party organization goes on, which takes place right immediately after the election, is pretty well done. Then the individuals get to set up their offices, and I've been in the buildings here where the congressmen or new congressmen-elect are going around with their staff members checking out the offices that are going to be available. Of course, the senior members that retire or got beat in the election have to move on, and so those are the first offices that are available. And then any sitting member is going to have more seniority and be able to choose the nicest of those offices, and then then their offices become available. And so once it's sorted out, they begin to look around, and then they have a lottery in which they get to choose in order of how they drew in the lottery, choose which offices they want. And of course, the more desirable ones go first, the ones that have a view of the Capitol or are closer to committee rooms and so forth. And then the ones that get the lowest ranking end up on the top floor on the back side of the building.
Like on the 5th floor of Cannon.
That's right, yes.
Where I was actually for 4 years up on the 5th floor of Cannon up there, but it was a great place. But, when everyone comes in, I think it's January 5th, and to be sworn in this year, there's an oath that we take. Mm-hmm. Yeah, is there a history of the oath itself, or do you know where that was derived from?
Actually, I don't.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I know we swear obviously to the Constitution and with no restrictions or reservations, and but it's quite a ceremony, the opening day, and the when each individual member of Congress stands up and proclaims who they're voting for Speaker, and it really is quite a process that you go through that day, and it's. Like you said, the celebrations, if you want to call it that, I think somewhat are muted this year because it's a lot of serious work to do. Mm-hmm. But that it is quite a process that we go through. What other, there's the swearing in, obviously, with the new Congress, but what other types of major ceremonies take place in the Capitol building itself?
The main one, of course, is the inauguration every 4 years, and then the celebrations of the new Congress every 2 years. there are presentations of medals, the Congressional Medal of Honor, Congressional Gold Medal given in the Capitol. Once in a while, a Presidential Medal of Freedom will be given there. One of the things is you have to do it at the right time because the Congress has to be in session to pass the resolutions and so forth. We have the lying in state ceremonies when a leader dies that take place in the rotunda. And then when we get a new statue, there are several statues on the way to the Capitol now. They've cleared a space, I know, for Harry Truman. The state of Missouri is going to be removing one of theirs and putting Harry Truman in its place. And presidents always get in the rotunda, and so they'll be putting Harry Truman in there, probably this year.
We had the Congressional Gold Medal for Norman Borlaug here a few years back, and there is an effort underfoot to have Norman Borlaug as being one of the two statues at each state. I believe it's two statues.
Two statues per state, yes.
And how is that determined, do you know?
Well, the state themselves determine who they want, and then every state has two in now, and so they have to come back to the Congress and say, well, we think we've got somebody better, or something has happened in history to bypass this person.
Now, as a new Congress, when it's sworn in, what do you think, as looking at members themselves, as far as the transition, as far as coming in here? I mean, and there's a lot of work going on right now. I sit on what we call the steering committee that makes committee assignments, and which is a huge puzzle to try to put together because you have everybody wanting the committee assignments that they the best represent their district or their state, and to try and fit all that together. But what do you think, as far as a new member, what's the biggest kind of transition thing that they have to go through?
I should think, and from the members I've talked to, it would be the fact that you're running to be top person in your district, and you win the election, and then you come and find out that you're one of only 435, and that almost everybody else is more senior than you are, and so you're not going to get exactly what you want, and you've got to learn how to assert the interests of your district and the people that elected you without offending the other people who were elected generally by just about as many people as you were, and you really begin to see what democracy is about. It's not about electing one person, it's about getting together and making decisions.
Yeah. The Capitol itself has gone through some restoration, I guess, recently. You want to talk about what's changed recently in the Capitol building itself?
Well, in particular, they're still in process of restoring some of the wonderful frescoes on the Senate side. They discovered a new spot this year where somebody had decided to paint over some wonderful marble. It's not the marble itself, but it's the paint that imitates marble. And it was a beautiful white with blue streaks, and it matched the marble in the hallway there. And for some reason, apparently about the time they installed the elevators with a lot of metal on it, they decided they wanted some fairly flat-looking gold paint in there. And so they're doing sort of archaeological work now, digging back down the layers of paint, and they discovered this wonderful faux marble that had been painted in the Senate wing, and so now they're planning the project to restore all of that.
What about the Capitol Visitor Center? What kind of effect has that had? I mean, this is a $420-some million project that was completed about 2 years ago right now, I believe, when the opening occurred. But has that had a big change as far as the operations of the Historical Society, and also what effects that had on the Capitol itself?
Well, absolutely it's affected us, because prior to that time you had to stand in line out in front of the Capitol and just hope you were going to get in. And now, because of the Visitor Center, you get in right away. You just have to wait to get through the security line, depending on how many busloads of people are ahead of you. But once you get inside, then there's a pleasant place to wait, and there's a ticketing system now, so that they can take 250 people every 10 minutes. That's about 20,000 a day, and it's a much more organized process than it used to be. It makes it much more pleasant. So now, instead of meeting groups at my office and walking them over to the Capitol and hoping we can get in when we get there, they can come in on their own, and I can meet them in the Visitor Center in pleasant circumstances. And there's lots of exhibits and things for people to look at while they're waiting to get in the building. And then I know that we'll know an exact time that we can get into the building. So it evens the flow out through the day, so not everybody shows up at the same time, and makes a much more pleasant experience for everybody.
Did the Historical Society have input? I mean, there's a film I know that people can watch about the operations of the Congress itself, and like you mentioned, all the displays that are there. Were you a part of all that, or how was that determined? What the content of the film was, and what actually is on display there?
That was all done by the architect and the Visitor Center process. I did get involved in it, in that they came to me and asked me to walk through the building with them and tell them what I thought was important. And that was a really nice experience to be able to share that kind of thing.
Yeah. It's an incredible facility, that's for sure, that we have there now.
Yes.
Just so folks know about the society itself. How do you operate? Where's your funding come from? All of those things.
Our funding comes from private sources entirely. We don't get any government money, and we were set up to kind of get around the budget process, which is always a problem with the Congress. And so we're supported by individual memberships of people around the country who want to do what they can to help preserve the history of the Congress, and then a number of major corporations that feel like this is an important thing to participate in as well. And we have merchandise that we sell, things like this tie here, which is modeled on the coffers in the rotunda. And we have holiday ornaments and books that we publish and things like that.
First of all, can Iowans help?
Absolutely. We have lots of members in Iowa, particularly since Congressman Schwengel has a lot of people that remember him out there.
How do they get in contact with you?
Best way is on our website, uschs.org. You can get a membership there.
Super. You have a calendar, the We the People. Is that one of your major fundraising efforts?
Yes, big effort for the year. We always put out a calendar. We spend several years researching something that happened on that day. We've been doing since the bicentennial, the Revolution. We've been doing it about that era, but now we've switched to do 150 years ago during the Civil War, which we'll be doing for the next few years, and having events that happened on that day for people to see.
And, that's the calendar is great, that's for sure. And you have a book, what We the People, the Story of the U.S. Capitol, is that?
Yes, our big publication is a guidebook of the Capitol. Unfortunately, we're between printings at the moment, but it should be out shortly in a few months, and it's will be on sale in the bookshops in the Capitol, or you can buy it online from our website.
Well, with all the historical knowledge that you have, do you reach out to teachers and schools, or is there contact that way, or a role that you play as far as educating our kids?
Yes, we have guidebooks specially made for kids of various grades. We have coloring books for kids that don't read, and then simple books for younger kids in a high school version. And then we also do symposia and have scholarly papers for people that are really interested in the details.
I was going to ask what you do as far as the research side, the history of the Capitol, and is there organized programs that people can get involved in, or is it all historians, or how does that work?
Well, one of the more interesting programs we have now is a traveling exhibit that goes around the country. A lot of people aren't aware of the role of African Americans in building the Capitol building and working there, even though they were not represented there. And then, of course, the story of the beginnings of representation and now what we have come to today. And so we have a traveling exhibit about that shows at museums and schools and that sort of thing around the country. So people can contact us again through the website and reserve that traveling exhibit.
On the website, is there anything that's interactive, or can you go on your website and, can you tour the Capitol, or what all goes on your website?
Yes, we have a virtual tour of the Capitol. We have a number of presentations of historic photographs and things like that, and the history of some of the rooms, and some documents about the history of the Capitol as well, all on the website.
What do you see? The Capitol's a beautiful place, and generally speaking, very, very well maintained. But what do you think are some of the most impressive parts of the Capitol building itself?
Well, I'm lucky that I get to walk through and then read the history and so forth. And certainly the most impressive room in the Capitol is the old Senate chamber, where Henry Clay and Daniel Webster and John C. Calhoun were senators, and it's been restored as it was when they were in there. The Senate meets in there occasionally, but most days it is open to the public, and you can walk in there and stand for a few minutes and contemplate. The most amazing thing to me is those desks are jammed in so close that you can't even get your hand in between them. And the senators got no staff and no office. And so they had to live there with the people that they were debating, and to realize that the Webster-Hayne debate took place in that, and other famous moments in the history of the Senate.
Is there anything to the... I've heard that people, as kind of like a sport almost, would go and sit up in the balcony in the old Senate chamber, and senators would refer to the people up in the gallery, or talk to them, or try to impress ladies up there, things
Yes.
like that. If you could...
Yes, all of that is true. Sam Houston used to sit there at his desk with his muddy boots up on the desk and carve little wooden hearts and send them up to the nicest lady in the gallery. There was also a tradition on ceremonial occasions that women, of course, weren't elected senators in those days, but a senator could have a lady come and sit in his seat, and then he would sit on the top of the desk, and it was kind of considered prestigious to have a beautiful woman sitting in your desk. But that was as close as women got to being senators.
That's amazing. What other parts? Certainly the rotunda, things like that in the Capitol are extraordinarily impressive. I like
to remind people that the rotunda is our sacred space. We don't do anything controversial or partisan in the rotunda. It's reserved for particular things like the lying in state ceremony, or giving medals, or accepting statues and so forth. But the paintings in there are depictions of great moments in our history. There are 8 major paintings. 4 of them are about the Revolution, the Declaration of Independence, the 2 great battles, Saratoga and the last battle, Yorktown, and then Washington resigning his commission. And most people don't realize the significance of Washington's resigning his commission, that this is the moment when we very well could have had a military government just like everybody else did. And George Washington refused to do that, and no other general was willing to step in. And so we ended up with a government like we had promised at the beginning of the Revolution, instead of going the way that other countries had.
Do you know in that picture that Martha Washington is up in the gallery, supposedly looking down? From my understanding, she was not there. It's kind of a depiction, I think, of what it may have looked like if she were in attendance. But it is extremely significant as far as our history, because actually George Washington was so popular at that time. He could have been king if he wanted to be, and he in fact resigned his commission, turned the power of the military over to the civilian government. So that was amazing. But I don't know if you know anything about Martha being there or not.
Yes, we know that George delayed the ceremony to try to get Martha to come. The ceremony was in Annapolis, which was not that far from Mount Vernon, and he delayed the ceremony and asked her to come so she would be there, but she did not. And so he proceeded with the ceremony anyway, and the artist who knew George Washington knew that he had wanted her there, and he thought, well, let's put her in there, make it the way George wanted it.
And there's around the top of the rotundas, it looks like a relief almost, but it depicts the history of the country, and the advancements of the country. Can you talk a little bit about that, or the different parts of that?
Yes, it's an Italian-born artist named Constantino Brumidi, who came here as a refugee after the Revolution of 1848 in Italy. He spent most of the rest of his life painting in the Capitol. He was an excellent artist. And this particular technique they call trompe-l'oeil, which is trick the eye in French. It makes it look three-dimensional because he paints the shadows around the figures. And so he just paints a big circle, starting with an America figure, and then Columbus coming down off his ship, and Cortez and Pizarro, and the funeral of De Soto, and then Pocahontas saving John Smith, and the Pilgrims and William Penn, and various treaties, and the Revolution, and the Thomas Jefferson reading the Declaration of Independence on the steps of Independence Hall. And then a few battles, the death of Tecumseh, and the Mexican War, and the Civil War, and the California Gold Rush, and then the Spanish-American War, and climaxing with the first flight. Mm-hmm. And there's Leonardo da Vinci holding his model of an airplane design that might have almost worked, and then the achievement of his dreams through the Wright brothers with their airplane.
But there were several, weren't there 3 different artists that actually completed the entire, is that correct?
Yes, Brumidi was 73 when he started it, and about halfway around he had an accident and fell. There was a safety net, so he wasn't injured, but for some reason when he got back up there he was nervous. And so he recommended another artist and continued making drawings. And the next guy painted the rest of Brumidi's drawings before Brumidi died, but the Congress didn't feel like he was really as good an artist as Brumidi, so they wouldn't let him finish the last few feet that Brumidi had not drawn. And it wasn't until 1952 that the Congress finally felt that there was an artist, Alan Cox from New York, who was good enough to finish that, and so he painted the Civil War and the Spanish-American War and the first flight.
There's actually a face in the tree trunk up there, isn't there?
Yes, yes.
What is that?
Yes. Costagini, the second artist, was not allowed to sign his work, and even though he did in pencil, but he decided to put his face in there. So in one of the tree trunks is a very clear depiction of his face.
It's a pretty amazing part of the Capitol and the history of the country, certainly. How about in the dome itself, as far as the George Washington and the 13 maidens up there, I guess? And
yeah, Brumidi's greatest painting in the Capitol certainly is the one at the top of the dome. It shows George Washington going to heaven with an escort of 15 beautiful maidens. This goes back to the Greek idea that if you achieved a lot in life and kept your virtue, then the gods would invite you up to live with them in eternity. And so George is on his way. He's got this escort of 15 beautiful maidens. 13 of them have stars above their heads. The one next to Washington on his right has on a red cap, which is the Phrygian cap, the symbol of freedom in Roman symbolism. And that's significant because originally the statue on top of the Capitol was supposed to have that cap on it, but it had to be approved by the Secretary of War, who at that point was Jefferson Davis, who owned thousands of slaves and didn't want a freed slave on top of the Capitol, and that's what that cap really meant. And so he made him change the statue on top so it does not have the Phrygian cap on. So Brumidi, the artist, painted the cap up there after the war to make sure that it was there, standing for freedom that we all value.
What about the Senate and the House chambers themselves? Are there some unique, obviously they're unique just being what they are, but some really unique features in either or both of those?
Well, in the Senate, there are, of course, 100 desks for 100 senators, but 44 of them are desks that were used in the old Senate chamber. And so nowadays it's tradition that the senior senator from New Hampshire gets Daniel Webster's desk, and the senior senator from South Carolina gets John C. Calhoun's desk. It happens this year that Senator Gregg, the senior senator from New Hampshire, is retiring, and so his desk isn't going to pass to a not only a Democrat but a woman, Senator Shaheen. And those senators started carving their names in the desks, and so now the senators that get them after they've had them inside the drawer, yes, they get to carve their name in there along with the other senators who've had that desk over the years.
I know one time I got to see it was Senator Kennedy's desk, and I think both of his brothers, JFK and Robert, had carved their names into that desk, and then that was the desk that he also used, which is quite unique. How about in the House? We've got 435 members. We don't have desks in the House.
Right. The House chamber originally had desks. There were 262 of them when they moved in there, but now there are 435 members and not room for all those desks, so they give congressmen offices instead. So now there are benches, and there aren't any particular assigned seats, but you do have leadership tables there. And of course, in the Republican leadership table is a bullet hole from when the Puerto Rican nationalists shot up the House of Representatives in 1954, and they put a patch in the top of the desks, but they've left a hole in the drawer where it went through, and so you can show off that. And then, of course, this location with a historic painting of Lafayette in there, and a copy of a painting of George Washington, to kind of remind the members of the ideals and the people that we honor that set up the system.
A lot of people go down, and I'd love to see the old Supreme Court facilities that are in the Capitol itself. Everybody thinks about the Supreme Court now having their own building, but that wasn't always the case. You want any history about how that all transpired?
Yes, it's interesting to see because, for one thing, they tried to achieve the light level that the justices had at the time, and no electricity, so they just lit the surfaces that they worked on. It's a kind of dark and spooky room in some ways, but they've got the original furniture that the justices used, and the benches that people sat on. We know for sure that Dolly Madison liked to come in there and sit. And the chairs and tables are the original ones. So John Quincy Adams sat in one of those chairs at one of those tables and argued the Amistad case that was later made into the famous movie. And then the Dred Scott case, the last of the great slavery cases, the last time they tried to use the courts to deal with the slavery issue and discovered that they couldn't, so we had to have a war to settle it.
Well, I see we're almost out of time. Thank you very much, Steve, for being with us today. The 112th Congress opens this month. With the country facing so many challenges, we have no time to lose in getting to work on the issues of importance to the American people. As one session of Congress ends and another begins, we must stay focused on moving our country forward. I'd like to thank my guests for joining me today, and I hope you'll tune in next time on the Congressional Report.
From the nation's capital in Washington, D.C., this has been the Congressional Report with Iowa Congressman Tom Latham. Have a question, comment, or concern? Congressman Latham wants to hear from you.